The first thing Naomi noticed, walking through the front door of the house she'd left almost a year and a half earlier, suitcase in hand for the last time, this time to stay, was that the wing had changed again. Not back to the law office it had originally been. Not the guest space it had briefly become after the first restructuring. Something new, entirely soft yellow paint. A half-assembled crib still wrapped in plastic near the window. A rocking chair positioned exactly where morning light would fall across it. "You started the nursery without me," she said, standing in the doorway, one hand resting instinctively against the 6-month curve of her stomach. "I started it 3 weeks ago," Dae-sung admitted, appearing behind her, careful and slightly sheepish in a way she'd genuinely never associated with him during their first 6 years of marriage. "I know we agreed to do this together. I got impatient." "You got impatient," Naomi repeated, amused despite herself, running her hand along the crib's plastic wrapping. "Kwon Dae-sung, a man who once made me wait 11 days for a single text message, got impatient about a nursery." "That was different," Dae-sung said. "I was giving you space, exactly as you needed. This is a crib. There's a considerable difference in urgency." Naomi laughed, the sound easy and unguarded in a way that still, some days, surprised her with how natural it had become again. They'd moved back in together 2 months earlier, slowly, carefully, exactly the way Marcus had once warned her real rebuilding would need to happen, no dramatic single moment. Simply a gradual accumulation of ordinary days that eventually, quietly, became a life again. The divorce paperwork still sat, technically, in Marcus's files, neither finalized nor withdrawn, though Naomi found herself, increasingly, thinking of it less as insurance, and more as an artifact of a period of her life that had genuinely, permanently ended. "I need to tell you something," Dae-sung said, following her into the nursery, watching her settle carefully into the rocking chair, testing its give with the particular deliberate attention of someone 6 months pregnant and increasingly protective of her own comfort. "Something happened this week." "Nothing bad," he added quickly, watching her expression shift toward alarm. "Something I want to tell you about, because I promised you complete transparency, and I intend to keep that promise even when the situation is uncomfortable rather than dangerous." Naomi's hand stilled against her stomach. "Okay," she said carefully. "Tell me." "An old colleague reached out," Dae-sung said. "Someone I worked closely with years ago, before you and I met. She's in the city for a conference, wanted to catch up over dinner, purely professional in tone." He paused. "I said no. Immediately, without hesitation. But I want you to know it happened. Because I promised you I'd never again let you learn something like that secondhand, regardless of how insignificant it might seem to me." Naomi sat with this, watching her husband again, properly, completely stand before her with genuine, uncomplicated honesty about something that, months earlier, might have sent her spiraling into old fear. Instead, she simply felt something warm settle in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me. Even the small things. Especially the small things," Dae-sung said. "I learned, considerably too late, that the small things are exactly where everything used to go wrong." Welcome back, everyone. This is it. The final chapter of Naomi and Dae-sung's story, and I want to say something before we start. Several of you asked, thoughtfully, for a real, complete ending. Not just an emotional high point left hanging. I heard you, and this chapter answers everything: the house, the baby, whether he's actually stayed faithful, and yes, the godmother question too. Drop your city or country below, always, if you've followed this story since part 1. Thank you for sticking with Naomi this long. She's earned this ending, and so have you. Subscribe if you haven't already. And let's finally give this story the closing it deserves. Okay, let's go back into that nursery, Marcus called 2 days later, his voice carrying the particular careful neutrality of a lawyer, delivering a question he suspected already had an answer. "I need to know what you want done with the paperwork," he said. "It's been sitting dormant for months now, Naomi. I can keep it paused indefinitely if that's genuinely what serves you, but at some point, dormant stops being a strategy and starts just being avoidance." Naomi sat in her law office, hand resting against her stomach, considering the question with more clarity than she expected to feel. "Withdraw it," she said. "Completely, formally, I don't need it as insurance anymore, Marcus." There was a pause on the line. "You're certain?" "I'm certain," Naomi said. "I've spent 8 months watching him rebuild something real, not performed. I don't need a legal safety net for a marriage I actually trust again." "I'll have the withdrawal filed by end of week," Marcus said. "For what it's worth, Naomi, I've represented a lot of difficult divorces in my career. I don't think I've ever been genuinely happy to lose a client's business the way I am right now." She laughed, something warm settling in her chest as she hung up, and called Dae-sung immediately. "I withdrew the divorce filing," she said, the moment he answered. Officially, permanently, the silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Naomi almost asked if he was still there. "Dae-sung?" "I'm here," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she hadn't heard from him in months. I didn't expect that today. I thought that decision would come considerably later, after the baby, after we'd had more time to I've had enough time," Naomi said gently. 8 months of watching you handle small temptations honestly. Watching you build a foundation with actual proof instead of promises. I don't need more time to know what I already know. Dae-sung. That evening, they told Patrice together, over dinner at the small kitchen table where so much of this entire journey had originally begun, the same table where Naomi had once packed a suitcase in silence. The same table where Dae-sung had once knelt on the floor after a broken vase. "Well," Patrice said. Once they'd shared the news, studying both of them with the particular sharp, assessing warmth she'd carried throughout the entire ordeal. "I suppose I should stop keeping my emergency guest room quite so ready for unexpected arrivals." "You can retire it entirely, Auntie," Naomi said. Laughing. "I'll believe that," Patrice said, "once I see 6 more months of this actually holding steady. But I'll admit," she paused, studying Dae-sung with something that had, over the past year, genuinely warmed from wary tolerance into real affection. "I'm proud of you, young man. I didn't expect to say that, given everything I watched this family survive. But you've earned it." "Thank you," Dae-sung said quietly, something genuinely moved in his voice. The following weeks settled into a rhythm neither of them had fully experienced during their original 6 years of marriage. Ordinary, unremarkable, genuinely peaceful. Dae-sung continued his twice-weekly therapy sessions, no longer out of crisis management but, as he described it, simple ongoing maintenance, the ordinary discipline of staying honest with himself. Naomi transitioned gradually into reduced hours at her firm, preparing for maternity leave while still handling her most significant cases, with the same sharp precision that had first caught Dae-sung's attention on a plane full of strangers years earlier. Sojin visited weekly now, no longer the careful, business-calculating mother-in-law of the marriage's early years. But something considerably warmer, bringing baby clothes, she insisted, were simply practical purchases, lingering over tea with Naomi in a way that had, gradually, become genuine friendship rather than obligation. "I never properly told you," Sujin said, during one such visit, watching Naomi carefully organize the nursery's growing collection of donated and purchased items. "How much I regret my initial reaction to your relationship with my son. 6 years ago, over a lipstick stain, I called you hysterical rather than genuinely wronged. You've more than made up for that," Naomi said honestly, "especially this past year." "I'm trying," Sujin said. "It matters to me that you know it's genuine, not simply performed for my son's benefit." "I know," Naomi said, and meant it completely. 6 weeks before her due date, Naomi found herself standing in the nursery late one evening, unable to sleep, watching the completed room crib finally assembled, soft yellow walls decorated with small, careful details Dae-sung had insisted on choosing personally rather than delegating. He found her there near midnight, joining her quietly at the window. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Thinking," Naomi said, "about everything." How impossible this would have seemed, 18 months ago, standing in a completely different bathroom, looking at a completely different piece of evidence. Dae-sung was quiet for a moment, something reflective crossing his face. "I think about that morning often," he said. "Watching you pack. understanding for the first time that I might actually lose everything that mattered because of choices I'd made repeatedly, believing each time I was somehow different, changed, incapable of doing it again. And now? Naomi asked. Now I understand the difference, Dae-sung said quietly, between believing you've changed and actually proving it. Consistently. Especially in the small moments nobody's watching. I don't think I understood that difference until you forced me to. Naomi leaned into him, watching the quiet nursery around them. 6 weeks from meeting a child neither of them had planned for, but both, genuinely, deeply wanted. Her phone buzzed unexpectedly on the windowsill. Hey One, sending a message that made Naomi smile before she'd even fully read it. Hey One, I know it's late, but I wanted to send this before I lost my nerve. I've been thinking about how strange, and honestly meaningful, it's been watching your relationship survive everything it survived, largely because I happened to be in the right position to help. I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but I wanted you both to know how much I've come to genuinely care about how this story turns out. Naomi showed the message to Dae-sung, something warm settling between them as they read it together. We should talk to her, Naomi said slowly, an idea forming. Properly, about something important. They invited Hey One to dinner the following week, not a business meeting, not a security briefing, simply dinner, a distinction Hey One herself noted with visible, careful surprise upon arrival. This is unusual, she said, settling into a seat at the kitchen table with the particular formal stiffness of someone unaccustomed to being on this side of a personal invitation. You've spent 11 years being unusually essential to this family's survival, Dae-sung said. I think it's overdue that we treat you as more than simply an employee, Hey One. Tonight, please, just be here as yourself. Hey One relaxed, slowly, over the course of the meal, sharing details about her own life, Naomi realized, with some surprise. She'd genuinely never asked about across their 18 months of crisis and rebuilding a younger brother in university, a mother recovering from surgery, a genuine, private passion for hiking that took her into the mountains most weekends when work allowed. I never asked, Naomi said partway through dinner, why you agreed to help me. That first time, testing Dae-sung in Busan. You could have simply refused, protected his privacy, avoided the entire complicated situation. Hey One considered the question seriously. 11 years is a long time to watch someone you respect make the same painful mistake repeatedly, she said finally. I believed, genuinely, that he was capable of becoming someone different if given the right kind of accountability. You provided that accountability, Mrs. Kim, in a way I never could as simply his employee. I wanted to help, because I genuinely wanted to see this story end differently than I feared it might. It almost didn't, Naomi said quietly. I know, Hey One said. I was genuinely frightened, more than once, watching how close everything came to falling apart entirely, especially during the Chulman crisis. Naomi and Dae-sung exchanged a glance, the moment they'd planned arriving naturally now, unforced. We wanted to ask you something, Naomi said. Something important, that goes beyond your professional role in this family. Hey One set down her fork, something careful and curious entering her expression. What is it? We'd like you to be the baby's godmother, Dae-sung said. Hey One went very still, genuine shock crossing her usually composed features. I'm sorry? You've protected this family, Naomi said, at real personal and professional risk, more times than either of us can properly count. You've been honest with me even when honesty cost you your employer's comfort. You've shown more consistent, unwavering loyalty to what actually matters than almost anyone else in either of our lives. We can't think of anyone more fitting to help guide this child, if something were ever to happen to either of us. Hey One's composed exterior finally, fully cracked, something genuinely moved crossing her face. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Her voice unsteady in a way Naomi had genuinely never witnessed from her across 18 months of crisis management. Say yes, Dae-sung said, smiling. Yes, Hey One said, laughing despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Obviously yes. I'm simply, she paused, collecting herself with visible effort. In 11 years of this job, sir, I've prepared for nearly every conceivable crisis. I genuinely did not prepare for this. Good, Naomi said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I think that's exactly the kind of surprise this family could use more of. Honestly, something good, instead of another emergency. The remainder of the evening passed in considerably lighter conversation, Hae-won gradually shedding her professional formality entirely. Laughing genuinely at Dae-sung's increasingly self-deprecating stories about his own early, clumsy attempts at grand romantic gestures during their courtship. He built you an entire law office wing, Hae-won said to Naomi. Incredulous. After betrayal number 2. I remember overseeing the construction budget. It was excessive even by this family's standards. I've since learned that's not actually what I needed, Naomi said, glancing meaningfully at Dae-sung. I've learned that too, Dae-sung said, something genuinely rueful in his voice, considerably later than I should have. As the evening wound down, Hae-won paused at the door, something more serious entering her expression once more. I want you both to know, she said, that agreeing to this role means I intend to take it seriously, not simply a ceremonial title. If either of you ever needs anything, for this child's sake, I will show up exactly the way I have for the past 11 years, regardless of what it requires. We know, Naomi said. That's precisely why we asked. 2 weeks later, on an unusually quiet Tuesday morning, Naomi woke at 4 a.m. with a persistent, unmistakable tightening that made her sit up sharply in bed, her hand immediately finding Dae-sung's shoulder. Dae-sung, she said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and genuine alarm. I think it's time. He was awake instantly, the particular immediate. Focused alertness she'd come to associate with genuine crisis response, though this time, his expression carried none of his usual careful control, simply raw, overwhelming excitement tangled with fear. Are you certain? He asked, already reaching for his phone to call the hospital. Fairly certain, Naomi said, breathing carefully through another contraction. Though I suspect we're about to become considerably more certain very quickly. By the time they arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, Naomi's contractions had progressed rapidly enough that the attending nurse, checking her status, simply looked up with mild, professional surprise. You're already at 7 centimeters, she said. This baby is not interested in waiting. Dae-sung, holding Naomi's hand through increasingly intense contractions, found himself, for the first time in longer than he could remember, genuinely, completely unable to calculate or strategize his way through what was happening. I don't know how to help, he admitted, his voice unsteady. I've navigated hostile takeovers, criminal negotiations, considerable danger. I have absolutely no idea what to actually do right now. You're doing it, Naomi said, gripping his hand through another wave of pain. Just stay. That's genuinely all I need. 6 hours later, in the gray, exhausted light of early morning, Dae-sung heard, for the first time, the sound of his own child's first cry. The nurse placed the baby directly onto Naomi's chest. And Dae-sung stood frozen at the bedside, watching, with an expression Naomi had genuinely never seen from him across their entire relationship, not the careful composure of business negotiations, not even the raw vulnerability of their reconciliation. Something entirely new, unguarded, and overwhelmed in a way that seemed to genuinely surprise him as much as it moved her. It's a girl, the nurse said, smiling, already beginning the routine checks. Healthy, strong lungs, clearly impatient to meet you both. Naomi looked down at her daughter's small, dark-eyed, already, remarkably, quiet now that she'd been placed against her mother's chest, and felt something crack open in her chest that had nothing to do with the physical exhaustion of labor and everything to do with 18 months of devastating betrayal, careful rebuilding, and genuine, hard-won love culminating in this exact, impossible moment. Dae-sung, she said softly, come here. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and Naomi watched him reach out with visibly trembling hands to touch his daughter's small fingers for the first time. She's perfect, he said, his voice thick with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide. Naomi, she's genuinely perfect. What do we call her? Naomi asked. We never actually settled on a name, despite months of discussion. They debated names for weeks, cycling through options that felt significant but never quite right, names honoring Dae-sung's family history, names reflecting Naomi's own heritage, careful combinations that satisfied neither of them fully. Dae-sung studied his daughter for a long moment, something settling into clarity behind his exhausted emotional expression. Sarah, he said slowly, after your mother, you've told me so many times how much of your strength comes from her, even though she died before you had the chance to fully know her as an adult. I think our daughter should carry that name forward. Naomi felt tears gather fresh, overwhelmed by the specificity and thoughtfulness of the suggestion. Sarah, she repeated, testing the name against her daughter's small, sleeping face. Sarah Kwon. Sarah Ashworth Kim, Dae-sung corrected gently. I think, given everything, both names matter equally. Sarah Ashworth Kim, Naomi said, and something about hearing both family names together, honoring both her own history and the complicated, hard-won family they'd rebuilt, felt exactly, precisely right. Patrice arrived within the hour, having driven directly from Gangwon County the moment she received Dae-sung's call, and found herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely, completely without words, staring down at her first great niece with an expression of pure, uncomplicated joy. Sarah, she said softly, once Naomi explained the name's significance. Your mother would have loved that baby. She would have loved this entire, impossible, hard-won story. I think about that sometimes, Naomi admitted. What she'd think of everything that's happened. The betrayals, the rebuilding, all of it. She'd be proud of you, Patrice said firmly. Not for staying, and not for leaving, but for insisting, throughout all of it, on making your own decisions rather than letting fear or pressure or anyone else's timeline dictate your life. That's exactly the kind of strength she raised you to have. So-jin arrived shortly after, considerably more composed than Patrice, but no less genuinely moved. Holding her first grandchild with careful, practiced tenderness that suggested, Naomi realized with quiet surprise, considerably more experience and warmth than she'd expected from the woman who'd once called her hysterical over a lipstick stain. She has your eyes, So-jin told Naomi, studying Sarah's small, curious face. Sharp, already assessing everything around her. I suspect she'll grow into exactly the kind of formidable woman this family desperately needs more of. Hae-won arrived last, having rushed directly from an unrelated business trip the moment she'd received Dae-sung's call, and stood somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the hospital room, uncertain of her place among the immediate family gathered there. Come here, Naomi said, noticing her hesitation. Godmothers don't stand at the back, Hae-won. Hae-won approached slowly, and when Naomi carefully transferred Sarah into her arms, something genuinely overwhelmed crossed Hae-won's usually composed features. She's beautiful, Hae-won said quietly, studying the sleeping infant with careful, reverent attention. I promise you both, I will take this role seriously. Whatever this child needs, throughout her entire life, I intend to be exactly as present and reliable as I've tried to be for her parents. We know, Dae-sung said, watching his most trusted employee, now formally, permanently family, hold his daughter with genuine tenderness. That evening, once the extended visitors had finally departed, leaving Naomi, Dae-sung, and their sleeping daughter alone in the quiet hospital room, Dae-sung sat beside the bed, watching his wife and child with an expression of complete, overwhelmed contentment. 18 months ago, he said quietly, I sat in that gray morning light, watching your car disappear down the driveway, genuinely uncertain I'd ever see either of you again. I don't think I fully understood, until this exact moment, how completely different this outcome could have been. But it wasn't, Naomi said gently. We're here. All three of us. I know, Dae-sung said. I intend to spend every single day, for the rest of my life, making certain I never take that outcome for granted. Naomi reached for his hand, exhausted and overwhelmed and genuinely. Completely happy in a way she genuinely hadn't believed possible 18 months earlier, watching their daughter sleep peacefully between them. Ask me tomorrow, she said softly, echoing, without quite meaning to, an old habit of phrase that had somehow followed them through this entire journey, whether all of it was worth it. I already know the answer, Dae-sung said, smiling, watching Sarah's small chest rise and fall in peaceful, steady breath. I've known it since the moment I heard her first cry. The first 3 weeks of Sarah's life passed in the particular exhausted, joyful blur every new parent eventually describes, but never quite manages to explain fully in advance, sleepless nights blending into groggy mornings. The small, precise rituals of feeding and diaper changes, and endless, careful monitoring of a newborn's every sound and movement. Dae-sung, to Naomi's genuine surprise, threw himself into the exhausting rhythm with a dedication that carried none of his previous careful delegation to staff or assistants. You don't have to do every single night feeding, Naomi told him, 3 weeks in, watching him stumble into the kitchen at 3 a.m., with the particular disoriented determination of a man running almost entirely on love and caffeine. We have help available, Dae-sung. You don't need to prove anything by doing this alone. I'm not proving anything, Dae-sung said, preparing a bottle with hands considerably steadier than his exhausted expression suggested. I want to be here. Every feeding, every difficult night, every moment I possibly can. I spent years delegating the difficult, unglamorous parts of relationships to other people, to other solutions, while telling myself I was still fully present. I don't intend to make that mistake with her. Naomi watched him carefully navigate the still unfamiliar territory of bottle preparation, something warm settling in her chest despite her own exhaustion. You're actually good at this, she observed, genuinely surprised. I had considerable motivation to learn quickly, Dae-sung said. Sarah does not appreciate delayed feeding schedules. Sarah, as if summoned by the mention of her own displeasure, began fussing from the nursery, and Dae-sung moved immediately, bottle in hand, toward the sound. Naomi followed more slowly, standing in the nursery doorway, watching her husband settle into the rocking chair he'd insisted on positioning exactly right for morning light, gently soothing their daughter with the particular focused, patient attention she'd once only witnessed him give to careful business negotiations. The board, predictably, had voiced some concern about his reduced availability during these early weeks, a quarterly meeting he delegated entirely to trusted lieutenants, several international calls he'd rescheduled without his previous careful anxiety about maintaining constant control. The company survived without your direct involvement for 6 weeks, Naomi observed, watching him juggle a conference call with one hand while gently bouncing a fussy Sarah with the other. Are you concerned that proves something uncomfortable about your previous priorities? Considerably, Dae-sung admitted, once he'd ended the call. I've spent years believing my constant direct oversight was essential to the company's stability. Watching it function perfectly well without that oversight for 6 weeks has been, admittedly, humbling. Good humbling or bad humbling? Naomi asked. Good, Dae-sung said, without hesitation. I think I needed to understand, clearly, that the version of myself who believed everything required my direct control was the same version capable of the mistakes that nearly destroyed everything actually important in my life. Learning to delegate, to trust, to prioritize differently, it's connected, I think, to everything else I've had to learn these past 2 years. 6 weeks after Sarah's birth, Naomi returned gradually to her law firm, structured, at her own insistence, around a considerably more flexible schedule than her previous demanding pace, while Dae-sung, equally deliberately, restructured his own executive responsibilities to ensure genuine, sustained presence at home, rather than the 12-hour workdays that had once defined their entire marriage. It wasn't seamless. There were exhausted arguments about division of labor, disagreements about parenting philosophy that revealed unexpected gaps in how differently they'd each been raised, entire evenings lost to Sarah's inexplicable, inconsolable crying that tested both their patience and their careful, hard-won emotional stability. But through all of it, something held steady that Naomi recognized, with quiet relief, as genuinely different from anything she'd experienced during their original 6 years of marriage: consistent, unglamorous, daily proof of commitment. rather than the dramatic gestures and equally dramatic betrayals that had once defined their relationship's entire rhythm. On a quiet Sunday evening, 4 months into Sarah's life, Naomi found herself sitting on the nursery floor, watching Dae-sung attempt, with visible determination and predictably chaotic results, to teach their daughter the correct way to hold a rattle, narrating the entire process with the particular earnest seriousness he brought to everything involving his daughter. "Like this," he said, gently guiding Sarah's small fingers around the rattle's handle. "See, you're a natural." Sarah, entirely uninterested in his careful instruction, promptly dropped the rattle and began reaching for his tie instead. "She has excellent priorities," Naomi observed, laughing. "She has terrible priorities," Dae-sung corrected, though he was laughing too. Retrieving the rattle with practiced patience. Ties are not appropriate teething material. Sarah Naomi watched this ordinary, imperfect, genuinely happy scene unfold in front of her, and felt something settle completely, permanently into place in her chest, not the fragile, cautious hope of 18 months earlier, but something considerably more solid. Genuine, sustained, everyday proof that the man kneeling on their daughter's nursery floor, patiently retrieving a dropped rattle for the 15th time, was genuinely, permanently different from the man who had once broken her trust 4 devastating times. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, with a brief, simple message that felt, somehow, considerably more significant than its brevity suggested. "Marcus, divorce filing formally, permanently closed as of this morning. Just wanted you to know it's officially done. For what it's worth, Naomi, I'm genuinely happy for you." Naomi read the message, then looked up at her husband, still patiently entertaining their daughter on the nursery floor, and felt something in her chest that had once carried genuine, protective doubt settle, finally, completely, into simple, uncomplicated peace. 6 months after Sarah's birth, they held a small, informal celebration at the house, not a formal party. Simply close family, and the handful of people who genuinely earned a place in their rebuilt life, gathered in the backyard on a warm Saturday afternoon. Patrice arrived early, immediately claiming Sarah for herself with the particular fierce, delighted authority of a great aunt who'd waited a long time for this exact role. "Come here, baby," she said, lifting Sarah from her stroller. "Let Auntie show you how real Southern cooking is supposed to smell before your daddy tries feeding you something with too much pepper again." "That was one incident," Dae-sung protested, though he was laughing. Watching Patrice carry Sarah toward the kitchen with practiced, comfortable ease, Soo-jin arrived shortly after, carrying, as had become her particular habit, a gift considerably more elaborate than the occasion strictly required, a small, beautifully crafted hanbok, sized for a 6-month-old, that she presented with genuine, unguarded pride. For her first birthday celebration, Soo-jin explained, "I know it's early, but I wanted to ensure the tailor had adequate time for proper fitting adjustments." "She's 6 months old, Soo-jin," Naomi said, laughing. "I don't think we need formal tailoring adjustments yet." "One can never be too prepared," Soo-jin said, entirely unbothered, already fussing over Sarah with the particular grandmother energy that had, over the past 6 months, become genuinely, delightfully predictable. Hae-won arrived last, having driven directly from a hiking trip still dressed in outdoor gear, immediately apologizing for her casual appearance before Naomi waved off the concern entirely. "Your family," Naomi said. "Family doesn't need to dress up for backyard barbecues." Hae-won smiled, something genuinely warm and relaxed in her expression that Naomi had watched develop gradually over the past 6 months, as her role in Sarah's life had settled into something considerably more natural than the formal, careful protectiveness she'd initially brought to the godmother role. The afternoon passed in easy, comfortable warmth. Patrice and Soo-jin, against every reasonable expectation either woman might once have held about the other, deep and genuine conversation about grandchildren and family recipes, Dae-sung manning the grill with considerably more confidence than his early cooking disasters had suggested he possessed. Sarah, passed between eager arms, thoroughly enjoying the attention with the particular contentment of a baby genuinely, surrounded by people who loved her. Marcus stopped by briefly in the late afternoon, having been invited, somewhat unusually, as both former legal counsel and, over 18 months of careful, difficult representation. someone who'd genuinely become a trusted friend. I have to say, he told Naomi, watching the gathering with visible, genuine warmth. When you first called me about divorce proceedings, I never once imagined I'd eventually be attending your daughter's 6-month celebration, watching your mother-in-law and aunt bond over collard greens recipes. Neither did I, Naomi admitted, laughing. For what it's worth, Marcus said, I've represented a lot of complicated marriages, Naomi. I don't think I've ever seen one rebuilt quite this thoroughly, or quite this genuinely. As evening settled in, warm and golden across the backyard, Dae-sung found Naomi standing near the edge of the gathering, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in Hae-won's arms, while Patrice and Soo-jin continued their increasingly animated recipe debate nearby. Look at this, Naomi said softly, gesturing toward the entire scene the family they'd built, carefully, painfully, genuinely, from the wreckage of devastating betrayal into something considerably stronger than either of them had believed possible. I am looking, Dae-sung said, pulling her close. Every single day I look at this, and I still don't fully believe how close I came to losing it entirely. But you didn't, Naomi said. No, Dae-sung agreed. Because you were brave enough to leave, brave enough to test whether real change was possible rather than simply hoping, and brave enough to come back once you'd actually verified it was real. He turned to face her fully. I don't think I say this often enough, Naomi, thank you. For every difficult, painful step of this entire process. I know it cost you considerably more than it cost me, watching me finally learn what I should have understood from the very beginning. Naomi studied her husband genuinely changed, consistently proven rather than simply promised, standing in a backyard full of family they'd both, in their own complicated ways, fought hard to keep, and felt something in her chest that had once carried careful, protective doubt settle, completely and permanently, into simple gratitude. We're here, she said simply. That's what matters now. Sarah stirred slightly in Hae-won's arms, small fussing sounds beginning to build toward genuine crying, and Hae-won, with practiced, comfortable ease, began the gentle bouncing motion she'd learned over 6 months of genuine, dedicated godmother duty. I think someone's ready for her evening feeding, Hae-won called out, and Naomi moved toward her daughter, Dae-sung following close behind, both of them settling into the particular, ordinary rhythm of parenthood that had become, over 6 months, considerably more precious than either of them had fully understood it would become. 1 year after Sarah's birth, on the anniversary of the day Naomi had first, tentatively, texted Dae-sung that she was ready to talk, they held a small, private ceremony in the same backyard where Sarah's 6-month celebration had taken place, not a wedding, since they'd technically never divorced, but something Dae-sung had specifically requested, a renewal of vows that felt, both of them agreed, considerably more meaningful than their original wedding day had ever managed to be. Our first wedding, Dae-sung said, standing before a small gathering of exactly the people who genuinely mattered. Patrice, Soo-jin, Hae-won holding a delighted, babbling Sarah, Marcus seated quietly toward the back, was beautiful, expensive, and, I understand now, built on promises I didn't yet fully understand how to keep. This one is different. Naomi stood across from him, considerably more casual than their original ceremony had demanded, wearing a simple dress rather than an elaborate gown, holding his hands with the particular steady confidence of someone who genuinely, thoroughly tested whether this love could survive real difficulty, rather than simply hoping it might. I promised you forever once before, Dae-sung continued, his voice carrying genuine, unguarded emotion, and I broke that promise, repeatedly, in ways that nearly cost us everything. I'm not making the same promise today. I'm making a different one. I promise you consistency. I promise you honesty, even about the small, uncomfortable things. I promise you the ordinary, unglamorous daily work of actually staying faithful, rather than simply the dramatic gesture of promising to. Naomi felt tears gathering, watching her husband genuinely changed, genuinely proven, standing before their small, hard-won family deliver vows that carried none of the empty grandeur of their original ceremony, only genuine, tested substance. I promise you, she said, her own voice steady despite her emotion, that I'll keep choosing honesty over comfortable silence, the way I did 18 months ago, even when it's frightening. Even when it would be easier to simply hope things work out rather than actually verify they have. I promise you that I trust the man standing in front of me today, not because you've said the right words, but because you've spent 2 years proving them, consistently, in exactly the small moments that matter most. They exchanged simple rings, not replacing their original wedding bands, but joining them, worn together now as a physical reminder of both the promise once broken and the considerably more solid one rebuilt in its place. Sarah, watching the ceremony from Hae-won's arms with the particular delighted confusion of a 1-year-old encountering formal proceedings she didn't remotely understand, chose that exact moment to reach dramatically toward her parents, babbling something enthusiastic and entirely unintelligible. "I think she approves," Hae-won said, laughing, carrying Sarah forward to join her parents as the small gathering broke into warm, genuine applause. Later that evening, once the small ceremony had wound down into easy, comfortable celebration, Naomi found herself standing at the edge of the backyard, watching Sarah take her first genuinely confident steps across the grass. Dae-sung crouched a few feet away, arms open, patient and delighted as their daughter wobbled determinedly toward him. "Come on, Sarah," he encouraged, laughing as she stumbled, caught herself, and continued forward with fierce, 1-year-old determination. "You can do it." Sarah reached him moments later, collapsing into his arms with delighted, triumphant giggles, and Dae-sung lifted her high, spinning her gently while she shrieked with genuine joy. Naomi watched this ordinary, perfect scene, her husband, genuinely present, genuinely changed, celebrating their daughter's first steps in a backyard full of family who'd fought hard, in their own complicated ways, to help rebuild what 4 devastating betrayals had once nearly destroyed completely. "Penny for your thoughts," Patrice said, joining her at the edge of the gathering. "I was thinking," Naomi said slowly, "about how impossible this exact moment would have seemed 18 months ago. Standing in a bathroom, staring at a lipstick stain, genuinely believing I'd never feel this kind of uncomplicated happiness again. And now?" Patrice asked. "Now I understand something I don't think I fully grasped back then," Naomi said, watching Dae-sung carry Sarah toward them, both of them laughing at some private joke only they understood. That real change isn't a single dramatic moment. It's 1,000 small, unglamorous choices, made consistently, long after anyone's still watching closely to verify them. Dae-sung reached them, Sarah settling happily against his shoulder, and looked at Naomi with an expression that carried none of the careful uncertainty of their earlier reconciliation, simply genuine, settled, permanent contentment. "Ready to go inside?" he asked. "I believe someone's ready for bed, and someone else looks exhausted from an entire day of emotional ceremony." "Almost," Naomi said, and reached up, gently, to kiss him soft and unhurried. Nothing like the desperate, uncertain kisses of their earlier reconciliation. Simply the easy, settled affection of 2 people who genuinely, fully found their way back to each other. Sarah, squeezed between them, made an indignant sound of protest at being momentarily ignored. And both of them laughed against each other's mouths, breaking apart to find their daughter watching them with the particular offended dignity only a 1-year-old could manage. "She's jealous," Dae-sung said, kissing Sarah's forehead in immediate exaggerated apology, which earned a delighted giggle in place of her earlier indignation. "Ready now?" Naomi said, taking his free hand as they walked together toward the house genuinely, completely home, in every sense the word had come to mean across 2 devastating, difficult, ultimately triumphant years. This is it, everyone, the true end of Naomi and Dae-sung's story. Thank you to everyone who asked for this final chapter. And especially to the listener whose thoughtful message inspired exactly this ending. You were right. They deserved a real, complete resolution. And I hope this gave you everything you were hoping for. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment across all 4 parts. Mine's Hae-won becoming godmother. Let me know where you're watching from too. Subscribe for more stories about real, hard-won love. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end.